Whether we're talking about making spaces better, like safer for women, and therefore they're safer for everyone, or we look at it for those people that are advocating for the disabled community, if we make things better for the disabled, we make it better for everyone. Same thing. It's we're looking at the people that have the least in terms of presence in the space, and how do we serve them to therefore serve everyone.
Welcome to That's Her Problem, the podcast where women who lead, connect, and rewrite the rules get real about building community. The challenges we face aren't always the same as everyone else's. But here's the truth. A city that's good for women is good for everyone. I'm your host, Patty Weens. Welcome back. If you're a Patreon supporter of this podcast, you're watching or listening a day early and you get to hear your name in a Brazilian accent at the end of each episode. And if you're not a supporter, you can still sign up to support me at pattybikes.com/podcast. And regardless of your Patreon status, you can always send me a voice memo asking me anything you want or giving me feedback on an episode. Again, just go to pattybikes.com/podcast and click on Leave Me a Message. Today's guest is someone I've been admiring for a long time, Melissa Bruntlett. Melissa and her husband, Chris, wrote Building the City and Curbing Traffic, which were my first introductory literature to a life with more bikes and less cars. When I heard that they had just written a new book called Women Changing Cities, I said, wait, that's my idea. So I reached out to Melissa right away and she agreed to come on the show to talk about this book. We recorded this in early November, and at that time, we didn't have any snow yet. I'm saying this because as I'm recording this introduction, we're waist deep in winter and snow. But I make mention of it not quite being winter yet during our conversation. Enough said. Let's get to it. Melissa Bruntlett, welcome to That's Her Problem.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, this is so great. I've been following you for such a long time on, I guess it was X at first. And I just love the story of how you just wanted to move somewhere. You left Vancouver and went to the Netherlands, you and
Mhm.
Chris and the family, because you were looking for a place to call home where you could move around freely without the car dependency, and you didn't want to feel like every time you got on a bike, it was a political statement. And
Yeah.
I cannot relate to that more, but I'm not moving. So tell me a little bit about your origin story into, urbanism as a woman. How was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of us, my origin story is very heavily linked to me being a mom, a young mom at the time, um, of young children. I don't consider myself old, but my children are no longer young. But we from suburban Ontario to Vancouver in 2007. At at a time when the city was beginning to change quite positively for cycling. They elected a very progressive mayor. We moved to a very walkable, cyclable community in Vancouver, and I found myself moving around a lot with, at that point, a 1 and a 3-year-old, really exploring the city in a different scale, exploring it obviously through their eyes, but also the eyes of somebody moving around with 2 small children. We were a one-car household, and Chris did not work in the city of Vancouver, he was always commuting out of the city. So for me, moving around meant moving around by public transportation, walking, and cycling. And at first, I didn't think anything of it. I had a very similar upbringing with my family. We were also a one car household when I was a kid. So I would move around with my mom on buses and walking to the store and things like that. So it didn't seem too special until people started asking me how on earth it was that I was making it possible to cycle with the kids to daycare or to school or programs, or, do all my groceries without ever getting into a car. And yeah, I just felt like there was a story to share there. And so started to share my own story, and with that learning about others. And I was just speaking to someone recently who referred to it as like the veil coming off, and suddenly you start to see the city much differently. You see the challenges, but then you also see the opportunities or the benefits. And so I really wanted to focus on what those benefits were for me as someone moving around with two small children, but also as a woman, feeling a little more connected, sometimes feeling more seen, sometimes not, but just being able to share that experience through writing, through photography, and eventually through videos. And what's interesting is that I always come from this as a woman. Obviously, it's my existence. It informs everything I do, but also as a mom. And I did find a lot of the people that I was still working with were very, very talented men, my husband included, but I was always sort of on my own in this world until I started to build out that network, meet a lot of really incredible women in Vancouver and further afield in the years that followed. But it was always still, like, me having to say, "Okay, but, do we have enough women represented in what we're talking about? Are we making sure there's a balance? Are we talking to a diversity of people and a diversity of perspectives in a way that maybe the people I was working with weren't thinking of?" Their experience was as a man was different from mine, and so they weren't thinking, "Oh, well, maybe we should talk to a mom, when we're putting together a video." And, me understanding that that's actually a really valuable perspective to include. So that's sort of where it all started, and then Chris and I had this harebrained idea to start a company called Modacity in 2014, and then everything just sort of built from there in terms of being able to create that content, that storytelling that does represent as best as we can the diversity of people in our cities and how they move, and eventually leading to us writing our first book that became the introduction to so many places and people in the Netherlands that inspired us to ultimately pack up our family and move here in 2019. And now, coming up on 7 years of Dutch life, we are
Wow.
Dutch citizens now, getting to enjoy, yeah, everything that we wrote about in that first book in terms of the quality of life for me, for the children who've now grown up, and one of them is now an adult, growing up in this sort of teen normalcy of cycling and embracing public transportation as a completely normal way of moving, and watching them thrive while we've also been able to thrive has been, yeah, it feels like a really long journey for us. The kids, probably it seems a lot shorter. Kids have a different timeline than we do. But yeah, we couldn't be happier with how, it went from, just me sharing stories as a mommy blogger to now being able to share the stories of incredible things happening around the world.
We need more mommy bloggers like that, I think, and I keep thinking of your kids, they have no idea how great they
Yeah,
have it. This independence that teenagers have there, that kids have there to just move around without worrying about dad and mom driving them everywhere.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, people will ask us all the time, like, did you just move there for the bikes? And of course, that's part of it. But, for us, the main motivating factor was the kids. So they were 10 and 12 when we moved here. So they do have some memory of what it was like. And, they're crazy parents that made them cycle way too much in the rain and in a Pacific Northwest winter. But, all that notwithstanding, we were really adamant that we would not make this move if they weren't willing to make it, if they felt it would be too much. We had both made very big moves when we were young, myself when I was 8 and Chris when he was 10. And we know what you leave behind when you move far away from your social network is you have to start over, and it's not easy, and sometimes it takes a long time to recover. Our kids, unfortunately, a year after we moved here, had to deal with the impacts of COVID as well. And so, we didn't know it was coming, but it was always a conversation with them of, is this something that you guys are okay with? Will you like will you hate us forever if we make this move or not? And they were always game. And I think they now, to some extent, really appreciate the lives that they've been able to have here. Our son got to travel back to Vancouver a couple of years ago to visit friends, and I thought for sure he'd come home and say, "I wanna go back," and he came back and he said, "No, it was really nice, but I don't wanna move back." You know?
That's
There's
so great.
there's too many cars. Our daughter now is, she's gonna be going to the UK for a couple of years on a bit of a gap, and she knows that she wants to come back because she knows what she's giving up in terms of that freedom, even as a 19-year-old, to be able to cycle and walk to work or take the train to get to school without having to drive. She's now she's taking her driver's lessons to basically prepare herself to live in a place where inevitably she probably will have to drive to access things. So they're aware in different ways. I think they're annoyed sometimes with how much they know. Again, that veil coming down. But yeah, so I think for us it's to see them be able, like I said, to see them to be able to thrive and enjoy just like the normalcy of riding in a throng of teenagers, which is all I wanted for them, you know, it's kind of special.
Yeah, that thing of the veil coming off is something. Hey, you just, once you see things, you really can't unsee it. And ever since I read Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez, I'm not sure if you've read that book.
I have,
It,
yeah.
yeah, you start to really see things differently. And one of my goals with this podcast is to do that for my male listeners, because
Mhm.
the way that we talk to each other, we don't need to woman-splain things. We don't need to,
Yeah.
I don't need to, you don't need to tell me as a mom. I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm a mom too. I've had these experiences. So this is one of the goals that I have, is to really make people see things the way that we see things, right?
Mhm.
Do you, in writing your book, like I'm gonna just read a little excerpt of something that you wrote that was written about your book. In your recently published book, Women Changing Cities, I can't believe it. When you published that, I was like, no, that's amazing. That's my idea. And I'm so, and instead of being jealous, I was like, yes, more, more.
Yeah.
Anyways, you highlight the groundbreaking work of female mayors, planners, advocates, and policymakers in reshaping urban spaces for the better. From Paris to Bogota, Manila to Montreal, these leaders are reclaiming streets, reimagining mobility, and designing safer, more inclusive spaces, public spaces, despite fierce opposition. Through real world success stories and powerful insights, this book proves that when cities are built with women in mind, they become more livable for everyone. Whether you're passionate about gender equity, sustainable transport, or urban design, Women Changing Cities is a call to action and an inspiring blueprint for the future. That is just everything that I talk about all the time. When we see cities from the perspective of women, they become safer. And I
Mhm.
was telling this to Sarah Goodyear in my first real episode with a guest, because my first episode I interviewed myself, but the first real guest I had, she said, not just safer, but better. Just if a city is made for women's pleasure, convenience, then
Mhm.
everything is better for everyone. Every time I say something like that, I get backlash from people who feel, from men who feel like I'm male bashing. So I'm going to read to you a little excerpt from my book that caused a lot of problems for me.
Okay.
I said, I just wanted more bike lanes, safe streets, and a city that allowed women to feel on bikes the way men feel in big trucks, powerful and invincible, or at least safe.
Mhm.
And when I wrote that, I received some emails and comments that I was male bashing. Did you ever, throughout your writing experience, feel like that was something that you were getting pushback on?
All the time. And to be honest, choosing to name the new book Women Changing Cities was a very deliberate choice, knowing that it was going to turn some people away. Making the book pink also was, we were very aware when Chris and I were going through everything. But it was really important that the spirit of the book stayed in terms of having women changing cities, because that's what the book is about. And yeah, over the years, if I share something about women not being represented in the transport sector, or retention of women in this space, or women feeling safe, and so we need to have more mindfulness for social safety, I I wouldn't say I necessarily get a lot of vitriolic pushback, but I will hear, "Oh, but there's more women graduating from engineering and planning and architecture programs, so what's your problem?" Or, "I feel unsafe in dark spaces too. Why is this just a women's issue?" And it's, from the first perspective, sure, there are a lot more women that are graduating from these programs, in part because in the last 50 years, they've been allowed to actually be in the programs in the first place.
Exactly.
But
Or
the
vote or
problem
go to school or
exactly.
exist.
The fact of the matter is, though, that, they might be graduating from these programs, but because of ongoing implicit biases in terms of hiring processes, they're not getting the same jobs. Or if they get the jobs, they're not staying in the jobs because that mentorship doesn't exist in those spaces to keep them there, to feel like they're not alone or they're not pushing against a wall trying to move things forward. And then from the safety side, of course, some men feel unsafe in dark spaces, but it doesn't disqualify that feeling that women have, that the fact that, we do. I can remember my mom when I was 10 years old teaching me when you're walking home from your friend's house up the street, make sure to walk with your keys in between your knuckles just in case. I mean, this is something we're taught from a young age. And so when we're talking about safety, it's so the men don't think that. Young boys aren't taught to do that. They're not taught to have their phone ready with, their emergency contact in case something happens in the same way that girls are. And it's because, we're not designing cities with their perspectives in mind enough. We're getting there, we're moving forward, but we need to be aware that women's experiences should be informing what we do, whether it's, you know, social safety at night, safety on cycle lanes and on footpaths, safety in the workplace, feelings of comfort in all of those spaces. They benefit everybody, but if we don't have those women's perspectives providing that backbone to it, then it's still just serving one side of a gendered idea of how we see cities.
One of the things that people say to me or men say to me is and I'm really not male bashing here. But it's always men that say these things, so I can't help it, right? It's not like
Yeah.
women are saying this to me. So one of the things that is said that men say to me is if we keep pushing back like this, we're only going to make things worse for ourselves because, we need to invite these people to the table. And I'm thinking, I don't want to sit with my aggressor at a table. I don't
Mhm.
want to feel, I already feel unsafe the minute I step out of the door. Why is it that I have to invite them to the table, to have a seat at the table? So when someone says, well, one of the responses I got to that paragraph that I read to you was, well, there are women who drive trucks too.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. And there are women who are conservative and women who are liberal and women who are Green Party and women who walk and women who cycle and women who have kids and women who don't. But it's the problem is that we're not taking any of those intersectionalities into consideration. And to just push back and say, well, women do this too, or women can be, in the case of the most recent election in Montreal, we had Valerie Plante in power as a mayor for 8 years, and her opposition was also a woman and is now the mayor. So we have mayors that are not as progressive as others, whether they're male or female, that doesn't matter. But the problem is that we don't that intersectional lens is never part of how we view things, and that's why we get stuck. In the cities, the organizations, the governments that take a much more intersectional lens, understanding that we don't just have one blob that's men and one blob that's women, and if we make things better for this one blob, it'll be fine in this XYZ ways without looking at how there are all these myriad types of women in that space, then we just don't progress in a way that benefits everyone regardless of your structural beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely. And making it, and even if we did, say we did make things better just for that one group, it's crazy how you can't see that that would also make it better for everyone else. Because when you take
Mhm.
care of the lowest common denominator, you're taking care of everyone. It's basic, simple math,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yep. Whether we're talking about making spaces better, like safer for women, and therefore they're safer for everyone, or we look at it for those people that are advocating for the disabled community, if we make things better for the disabled, we make it better for everyone. Same thing. It's we're looking at the people that have the least in terms of presence in the space, and how do we serve them to therefore serve everyone. And so we know for women, for example, it's if we design for women in mind, we're helping young women, we're helping women in middle age, we're helping elderly women, women with disabilities, women with children, we're helping young girls. Like it's all of that. And that inherently then benefits young boys, men of all ages, people that are non-binary or not gender non-conforming. It starts to fit into the whole perspective of helping everyone.
Absolutely, and that's what I was gonna say. When you're helping women, women are still the caregivers. They're
Mhm.
still the majority caregivers in our society. So there are more women and their children, and they take care of their elderly parents still for the most part. So we
Mhm.
are making society better as a whole.
Yeah, exactly. Mhm.
So when you were writing your book, you interviewed 19 women and you asked them the same about 6 or 7 sets of questions. Can you give me an example of some of the questions that you asked?
Yeah, of course. Well, it's funny because the questions were in some ways gendered focused in terms of, trying to understand the women's perspective, but the question I think that we started out with the most was, what is the biggest challenge your city is facing or will be facing in the 21st century? So we weren't asking them about what were women facing, but what was the city facing? And the similar responses were around the availability of housing, safe space and access to public space, climate adaptation and dealing with, what is to come in our future as the weather extremes get even worse. And then we would follow it up with, well, how does that particularly impact women? Because what we wanted to do was to understand the basis behind where the city is, but then from that lens, understand, okay, well, now how does this affect women? And then what are you doing or what has the city done to help them? Because I think far too often, if we just focus in just on, how do women experience your city without looking at the broader challenges of the city as a whole or the society as a whole, it can unfortunately lose some of the impact. But if we could tie it to your city is dealing with climate adaptation because you are Barcelona and you're experiencing hotter and hotter summers and longer periods of drought. What impact is that having on women? Well, they have less access to green. Okay, part of our strategy is to build more green, to build more public spaces, to have more shade, which ultimately creates a more inviting public space at all times of year so that women who need to get outside with children or older women that need to get out and be social to avoid isolation have those comfortable spaces to do that. And so it's making that correlation between the larger societal challenges and then the specific challenges for women.
What was one of the stories that really stuck out to you?
I mean, there are 11 stories, 11 chapters, 11 stories. But I think, the one that I come back to is not even related specifically to a city, but it's based in Latin America in general, and there's a movement there, an organization called Mujeres and Movimientos, Women on the Move. And I think the reason that story sticks with me so much is it comes back to what we were saying at the beginning around this idea of making space for women, but then retaining them in the field. This organization was started by several influential women at mayor or senator levels in several Latin American countries who wanted to provide an opportunity to give young women or women new to the transport sector space for mentorship, space for learning, space for networking, so that they would understand they weren't alone. Because these women themselves had often felt quite alone in the political sphere and the municipal level. And they wanted to make sure that for the next generation, they had somebody to learn from that helped them understand how to navigate their first job or their first political position and not automatically, in the face of backlash or pushback or even harassment, just choose to leave, to know that there was space there for support. And I think that's something that we see in pockets. There's Women in Urbanism Canada, for example, is an organization that is trying to support the elevation of women in urbanism. There's a similar organization in New Zealand, Women in Urbanism Aotearoa. There is Women in Transport in Asia. Women Mobilize Women is an agency that I worked for a few years as well. So there are a number of these organizations, but to have I think what's so special about Mujeres and Movimiento is that mentorship and that camaraderie to know that you're not alone. And the more that all of these organizations can sort of build on that and create this global support network, the more of us feel that we're not alone in this space. And I think that like for although it's not infrastructure based and it's not city based, I think that one really stuck out to me as something that's important in terms of how do we sustain this movement long term, and we need those networks that support around us.
So, if someone is listening and they're thinking, oh, I wish that existed around me, this support, this network, what would you say would be the first step to
Um,
create that?
yeah. I mean, I think the first step is to find out if that already exists. I think you might be surprised. um, there are there are a few, like even here in the Netherlands, there's 3 organizations within my local like proximity of 10 to 30 minutes on a train um, of exactly these networks that have been established to not only increase the visibility of women in urbanism, architecture, transportation, cycling, but are also providing that social network and that social safety or support for each other. So first, see if you can find that, and if that doesn't exist, I would say you likely, if you're in the cycling world, if you go to your local cycling advocacy, I can guarantee you there are at least half of the people there are women that are helping to push that agenda along, and they would be likely very happy to at least start something together. I think it's very difficult to do it alone. I think you need to know that you have people behind you. And I think one thing I have learned over the years is that in the advocacy NGO space, there are a lot of women doing a lot of really amazing work, often underpaid because it
Yeah.
is volunteering or advocacy, but it's just a space that we tend to find ourselves in. I think there's a whole book about that in terms of women, you know, if you want here, I'm giving you something if you want it, Patty, but I
Tell
think
me.
there's a whole thesis around why are women in this advocacy, volunteering, NGO space more so than, in the professional private consultancy world. I don't know. That's a grand assumption, but I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But I think they're there and yeah, then at least like I said in the feminist city chapter of Curbing Traffic, it's I don't want to didn't want to feel alone anymore, and that's what, was nice about cycling around here is I was no longer alone on the bike lanes, and I think that's the thing is we don't want to be alone in our advocacy for women in this space, and it's just a matter of making those connections and it'll flourish from there, I'm sure.
It's interesting you say that because I always say that if you are feeling alone, get on a bike, and then at the next stoplight, ask the person stopped on their bike and say, hey, where do you guys hang out?
Yeah.
Or just say, "Nice bike." I, actually wanna tell you a story, and so my listeners can hear as well. I was riding to work the other day, and it's going to be winter here any second. I'm in Winnipeg, and it's going to happen. No amount of climate change is gonna keep winter completely away from us. So I'm taking a new route to work because we've moved. And as I stopped, this woman passed me, first of all, on her bike. And I thought, okay, good, that's fine. Go ahead, but I'll catch you at the lights. And I stopped beside her and I said, hi, do you know if they clean this in the winter? Do you ride in the winter? So she said, no, I don't really ride in winter. I don't have a winter bike, but I walk here quite a bit. So they do clean it and it's a priority. So you're going to be great if you have a winter bike. And we had this whole conversation for the next 10 minutes. And by the end, we were friends.
Yeah.
And I told her about my book. I told her about Bike Winnipeg, and she started following me on Instagram. And it was a really great conversation and a way to connect really quickly to
Mhm.
another woman. And I'm thinking, yeah, if you want to know about whether there is an advocacy group in your city, you really need to just talk to the next bike person because we do feel vulnerable on a bike and we start looking for ways that we can make change. Do you agree?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've had a lot of happenstance conversations with people on bicycles, whether it's, back in Vancouver or here or on our travels. And it's the thing that's beautiful about walking and cycling is you are moving at usually such a slow pace that, it makes that opportunity to have those conversations more viable. It makes the stop and chat. much more realistic. And it is because we're just moving at a little bit of a different pace. We have to make eye contact with each other. And that just it takes down some of the barriers at least to having that initial conversation. And then yeah, sometimes it's quite special, as you just pointed out, of what can happen from there.
That's awesome. Are you using your space because you do have books and videos and you have a Modacity life? That's what it's called, right? That's how I say it. I always thought it was Modacity, but it's Modacity.
A lot of people think that, and that's fine. We always just say as long as you end up on our social media channels or website. But yeah, so Chris and I have a business together called Modacity, which we started in 2014. Just this year, I started a branch of it that's my own called Modacity Creative, which is my own consultancy that I do work from as an independent businesswoman.
Amazing. And so, what kind of work are you doing as an independent businesswoman? What kind of contract work are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, I still do a lot of work in communications, so that's anything from writing to photography to video production. I do contribute to a few online news sources, so more prominently is ZAG Daily, which is a European organization that is focused on innovation and transport. But aside from the communications, I work with other consultants that are working in cities and yeah, anything from engagement strategies to tactical urbanism projects. I don't do the design work, so I'm very much more on the strategic thinking and supporting communications development. And then on a larger scale, I do advisory work for a number of EU projects that are focused on reallocation of space or creating inclusive and safe spaces, not just for women, but looking at it, but bringing that lens of how can a reallocation of street space in, let's say, Budapest benefit children's mobility in terms of getting to school independently and ultimately, obviously, with that women's independence in terms of how they can move without having to always chauffeur children around. And then how can we do that safely and comfortably to attract the most users, regardless of age, gender, ability, or otherwise, to use this and have that transformative step forward for these kinds of cities.
That is really great. I'm excited to see what's ahead for you with Modacity Creative.
Thanks.
This episode is brought to you by Shifter's new online course, The Ultimate Guide to Bike Commuting and Urban Cycling. This course gives you all the knowledge you need to make the bike a bigger part of your daily life. It's created by Kaylin Klingbeil and Tom Babin. This is so fitting because Tom's YouTube channel was the catalyst for my winter cycling journey from casual bike rider to year-round bike commuter. Chances are you're already riding your bike a lot, but you might know someone who isn't and who would like to make the transition but just doesn't know how. I'm telling you, this is exactly what they need. Find the link to the course in the show notes and on my website at pattybikes.com/podcast. So we've arrived at the Thank You, Amy section of the show, where I ask you the question, was there a time when you were underestimated and you used that opportunity to excel and even exceed expectations?
Yeah, I mean, I got this the alluding to this question beforehand, and I was pondering what what would I write about or what would I talk about, and I think, most recently, I think this experience in terms of starting Modacity Creative would be something that sort of started as something where maybe it was based on something where I felt like I was being underestimated. Because I'm not a trained planner or engineer in transportation, very often I find people don't necessarily know where I fit, in which box do I go, because I obviously do communications, I have that background, but then I have this knowledge of how cities can design for good mobility and more inclusive mobility. People don't always know where to put me, and that means that despite working for some amazing consultancies, always feeling like I was a bit of the odd person out, and sometimes people saying, "Well, yeah, it's all well and good, but it's just feelings, like, tell me something practical, something tangible, quantitative." And so when I started Medacity Creative, it was sort of built on this idea of, I'm tired of being underestimated in terms of how I can contribute to this, even from my side of the more soft, qualitative side of things. And anyone starting a small business will say you don't know how things are going to go. It could be great. It could. be really challenging. You could not survive the first year. What I'm happy to report is that I have not had a quiet month since I started at the beginning of this year.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. I mean, I think I reached that point at probably about a month ago where I realized I think I need to start saying no because I don't have enough time in my week. And it's a wonderful place to be, and I'm not at all ungrateful for all of the work that I've been able to do since taking this step out on my own. But it's just that sort of that evidence for me anyways, if not for the people around me, that sure, it I don't fit into a certain box, but there's a need for what I can do,
I'll just
and so
make my own
I'm
box.
grateful. Yeah, exactly. I'll make
I'll
my
set
own
my own
very
table.
lovely yeah, lovely pink box with a little bow, but I'm happy to be in my own little creative space and be able to keep contributing in a way that I
Wow,
think is meaningful.
that's really great and congratulations. I'm so excited for you and so proud of you. It's so great to
Thank you.
see things evolving that way. All right, well, it's time for a rapid fire. Are you ready?
As ready as I can be.
Okay. All right, number 1. If you were a bicycle, what kind of bicycle would you be?
I'd be an Oma Feets. Slow,
I
comfortable.
knew you were going to say slow and comfortable and Dutch. Thank you very much. I love it. Second question. What is your superpower?
Yeah. Again, I had this sort of briefing ahead of time, but I think what I would say is my superpower might seem really fluffy, but it's being able to be like land in a new place and be able to see the potential. I think we so often get bogged down with like, oh, things could be so much better and it's not good enough. And when I go into any city, regardless of where it is at its where it is in its transport journey, I can see the potential that is there and see the benefits that could come if people just yeah, take off the blinders and see what's new, and I try to communicate that as best I can in our social media and in content I create.
So it's seeing and then translating from
Yeah,
what you see. I love it.
yeah,
The third question is we'd like a book recommendation by a female author.
mhm. So I read this over the summer. It's called The Nature of Our Cities by Nadina Gala. She actually did a reverse Melissa and Chris, so she lives where we grew up, which is kind of funny.
No.
But her book is interesting because she looks at this intersection of how we need to be um, giving nature greater status in our cities for the better of our future, but also how technology is still part of that conversation, which, you know, in at first you're like, keep tech out of nature. Nature should just be its own. But it's she tells these wonderful stories or recounts research that's happening where technology is actually helping cities become much more natural or become more climate resilient. And I found it quite a fascinating book. So definitely worth a read.
Can you say the title and author again?
Yep. So it's The Nature of Our Cities by Nadina Gala,
Amazing. And she is Dutch and moved to
Canada to Southern
No.
Ontario.
Wow, that's great. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you for your time. But I do want to
Mhm.
ask you, what's next for you? Where are we going next? I know that you have your business that's keeping you very busy, but you must be thinking of the next book.
Yeah, we are. We are thinking about what the next book could be. In all honesty, after the first 2 books, we were like, "Nope, we're done. No more books." And
It's
then
so much work. Mine is
it
a
is.
tiny little book and it was like all consuming.
Exactly. But I think we had such a rewarding experience with Women Changing Cities in terms of kinda getting back to that traveling places, researching, documenting, and we really enjoyed that. So, you know, I think in the next few years, you could expect another title from us. And in the meantime, yeah, in the near future, it's promoting women changing cities. It's continuing to try to have that impact, tell those stories, build the business, and really try to enjoy, yeah, the life that we have. We're in a period of transition. Eldest, as I said, is moving out for a couple of years, and the younger one is probably not much further behind her. And so, yeah, for me, it's finding this new navigating this new space that's coming as a quote unquote middle-aged empty nester and you know what does that look like, how does that change, and I'm curious to see you know what that future holds, so yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we are curious to see it too. And I'm glad that you didn't say no to our conversation. You said yes and you agreed to come on. And we're going to be in touch and looking forward to what you have in store.
Patty.
Thank you so much. Thank you again for watching and listening. If you haven't picked up a copy of my book, it's available at your favorite bookstore and it's called That'll Never Work Here: Challenging the Myths Around Biking in a Winter City. This show is recorded and edited by me. The ideas for guests come from many people, from my partner Ian, from me, and from people like you, my listeners. I appreciate all the ideas, so please keep them coming. Support for this show comes from my Patreon supporters who tell me to just keep going, keep talking to these amazing women, and please say our names with a Brazilian accent, to which I say, what accent? Thank you, Andrew, Michael, Nikki, Halls Emporium, Tim, Luke, Linda, Rob, Julia, David, Stephanie, Jason, Emma, Misty, and Adam. Remember, if you want to catch up on old episodes, please head over to pattybikes.com/podcast. And for now, that's her problem.